Washington is running out of time as the October 1st funding deadline is here, and talks are stalling. A government shutdown is back on the table, and even over on Polymarket, we are seeing a 97% chance of a government shutdown. Now, the last time we saw a shutdown was actually in 2018 under Trump's first presidency. And these are the kind of headlines that can essentially get fund managers to yank or rip their assets out of the markets, and that would include crypto. So I'll break down what a shutdown means for XRP over the next few days and what I'm watching out for first. This essentially means that Jerome Powell and the Fed will be flying blind into their October meeting. And any level of uncertainty right now will cause big players to sit this one out. Sitting out again means sell pressure. Combine that with the fact that the BLS is still out of a leader. This is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is one of the most important agencies that the Fed uses to make its next decision. And now there's even more uncertainty because the White House just withdrew its nominee to run the BLS right as the next job report window approaches. If an economic shutdown also delays economic data, the Fed goes into October with a lot less clarity and markets start guessing. Believe me, you do not want markets guessing. That usually means bigger moves, not smaller ones, and more often than not, it means moves to the downside. Also, policy doors are quietly opening, which nobody is really talking about, or better yet, understands the significance, but the SEC just issued a no action letter that lets investment advisors use state chartered trust companies as qualified custodians for crypto, a step that essentially makes crypto custody simpler for traditional firms. Headlines like this typically don't trend, they don't make waves, but they change who can actually participate and how quickly that capital gets to show up when it's decided upon. And all across the world and across the board, we are becoming more and more crypto friendly because it's not just the US. Now 10 different banks in the European Union are moving ahead with a layer 1 blockchain or a network for tokenization. And if banks keep building digital rails while DC is fighting over this funding for the government shutdown, you can see where the flow is headed. At the end of the day, crypto runs 24/7, 365. So yes, I'm going to connect the dots, the setups, the signals that are going to matter this week. So the entire XRP community this week has been thrown for a bit of a loop surrounding that swift announcement that they're partnering with Consensus and Chainlink. Many people expected that behind closed doors, XRP and Ripple were the ones that were going to be involved in that deal, but it doesn't look to be the case as they are launching a blockchain for 30. Then today we are seeing another major announcement that kind of threw people for a loop. The fact that Ripple's David Schwartz, the CTO over at Ripple, the Chief Technology Officer, a face that is very well known in the community, basically stated that the time has come for him to step back from his day-to-day duties as a Ripple CTO by the end of the year. The good news is he will join the board of directors. The answer is kind of obvious, right? At the end of the day, he's been here for quite a while. He's done all sorts of really cool things and been involved in the crypto space since the very, very early days of DLTs or distributed ledger technologies. He's worked with the NSA. He's seen the early stages of Bitcoin. He coded the XRP ledger in many respects alongside a few others. And he's probably spending a lot of time over at the offices. Well, now he wants to spend some time with his kids and his grandkids and spend time on hobbies. And at the end of the day, we all don't know how much time we have left on Earth. So he wants to spend more time now doing things that are really interesting for him as a developer and a coder, researching other use cases for XRP, getting his hands dirty, probably in ways that he wasn't able to as a CTO in the company. And ultimately, he is going to be joining the board of directors over at Ripple and still advising them on where to go next, as Chris Larson asked him to join. So this isn't something that we really need to be too worried about. As you can see on the prior day, the price dumped just a little, but essentially the entire crypto market did, as well as Chainlink. You can see that on the day it is also down, even with that very positive news. So that said, it doesn't look like this has affected the price of XRP. Heck, even really big news hasn't done a great job at affecting the price of Chainlink. And I hope for the viewers that are on this channel, or at least watch me on this channel in the way that I teach and train, you begin to realize that sometimes news doesn't really matter. News is just noise, and that ultimately price is king. So even with two pieces of potentially negative news for XRP, it's still holding the line above this range right here at 275. Now, another major negative piece of news is the fact that we are now going to see a government shutdown. This would be the first time since Trump's last term in 2018, because at 12:01 a.m., the deadline to fund federal agencies is up. And yes, Democrats and Republicans are playing hardball. Now, apparently this shutdown has to do with disagreements among Democrats and Republicans when it comes to healthcare policy and how much money they're spending in that direction, and that a shutdown will push the U.S. into uncharted territory. White House officials who have been eager to cut the government workforce said they would use a lapse in funding to carry out mass firings of federal workers on top of the typical furloughs of hundreds of thousands of employees. Now, I'm assuming there's probably going to be some back pay for regular government workers, but maybe not contractors. And a shutdown of this scale truly will be harmful for the economy in the short term. However, in the long term, some of these government employees are truly not great employees to begin with, and they're always taking advantage of their government job situation, which is typically very cushy, very relaxed, and they don't really work that hard. There is no incentive to perform better, and that is not me trashing all government employees, but let's be real. Not one single person that is watching this video wouldn't agree that our government in the United States is completely bloated, and we are spending money in every single direction, arguably even just on employees, in ways that we should not be. So there are many theories. Some people are wondering, was this a very intentional plan to shut down government and use it as an excuse to fire or lay off a lot of people? Either way, this being the first time since 2018, I believe it's going to throw the market for a bit of a loop, which is why I think the market is down right now a little. This would furlough 750,000 workers per day, which is costing $400 million in daily compensation paid directly by me and you, the taxpayer. And just as a heads up, that shutdown lasted 35 days last time, which made it the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. The average length of a shutdown is 8 days, and its implications spread farther when it lasts longer. Now, the good news is that 86% of shutdowns saw the S&P 500 and higher 12 months later, with an average gain of 12.7%. So an environment like this, either way, where we're basically close to those prior new all-time highs in the stock market, probably won't be affected that much, even with a government shutdown that lasts more than a week. But in the short term, we might see some of those negative effects, considering the Fed will be flying blind into their October meeting. And as we know, one thing about Jerome Powell, the most powerful man in the world of finance, is the fact that this guy's pretty consistent and is very data driven, which means the Bureau of Labor Statistics just announced they will not release economic data, including the jobs report, which is due this Friday if the US government shuts down. Now, I'm not too sure how these federal agencies operate, whether he's going to reach out to them and get some inside information and a scoop on what's going on, but I don't think it always works like that. I actually think there's going to be a lot of data that is left to be had by Friday, which is going to lead the Fed into making a decision that is consistent with their approach and not to spook markets. So if he said he's going to slow down on interest rate cuts, then I believe they're likely going to do exactly that, which is in alignment with market expectations. And when markets get what they expect, we typically don't get volatility to the downside. If anything, it tends to trend with the overall trend. In other words, if the trend has consistently been up and we get our expectations, then the market continues to rally.